First of all, I'd like to welcome you to this event for the UK Automation Forum. This is our third event this year. If you haven't heard about the UK Automation Forum, it was launched in January this year. It was a brainchild of Automate UK, trade body Automate UK, and it's designed to bring together all kinds of stakeholders from government, from education, from industry experts, a wide range to bring together in one voice. So hopefully we can encourage further adoption of automation or / any adoption of automation going forward, and in some ways be able to influence government, influence other people, and hopefully help people learn as to what the benefits are going forward. So today we're talking about culture. Don't worry, we're not putting on our ballet shoes up here at the front. We're actually going to be talking about why a change in culture will benefit productivity across this country. So first of all, look, we've assembled an amazing panel here for you, and I'm going to go from the other end and ask them to introduce themselves to you. So Mike.
Good afternoon, Mike Wilson. I'm chair of the UK Automation Forum, but for my day job, I'm also Chief Automation Officer at the Manufacturing Technology Centre.
Henry Anson, Managing Director at Hennick Group. We're the publishers of The Manufacturer.
Good afternoon, everybody. Chris Corkin, Region Director for the Midlands and East of England at Make UK. Make UK are the national body for UK manufacturing employers, working with and representing around 22,000 manufacturing businesses.
Claire.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Claire Porter, and I'm the Director for Engagement for Workforce and Skills for the High Value Manufacturing Catapult.
Peter.
Hi, I'm Peter Williamson. I'm CEO at Automate UK. Automate UK being the industry association for robotics, automation, vision, processing and packaging machinery.
Excellent. So I think you'll agree, great panel. So first of all, I'm going to start off with a report that was published over 10 years ago by the All-Party Parliamentary Manufacturing Group. And at that time, they, and I quote, they believed that the UK did not have a clear understanding of what constitutes our national industrial culture and the interactions that shape it. Now, I'm going to ask the panel whether they think anything has changed since then. I'm going to go to you first, Mike.
I'm not sure a lot has changed, to be honest. I think we still have issues in terms of understanding what manufacturing means to the UK. The government has not been terribly supportive for quite a number of years. It's got nothing to do with political parties. It's just, the government in general has not really supported manufacturing generally. In the autumn statement, sort of last year, there was announcements of significant financial support, but really more about advanced manufacturing. And there's been lots of debate, maybe we can talk about this, as to what constitutes advanced manufacturing. When they've talked about it historically, they've tended to ignore a whole raft of our manufacturing sector. There have been reports looking at the size of UK manufacturing, the contribution of UK manufacturing to the economy. A lot of people are trying to get the message out there to say it's more important than a lot of people think. And I think that's the challenge that we have to address. We need to ensure that the people that effectively manage our country understand how important manufacturing is to the UK and why it needs significant support.
Okay, Henry.
Thanks, Mike. I love that phrase, advanced manufacturing. Do any of you represent unadvanced manufacturing? Okay, one or two, but yeah, I think it's one of those catch-alls and no one really quite knows what the definition is. My take on government and the public's perception of manufacturing is that it is finally changing. Now, I must preface this by saying my cup is always, and has been always, resolutely half full, if not brimming when it comes to the sector. But I do think public perception and therefore government interest in manufacturing is starting to change. Now, there's likely to be a change of government. I'm not saying there will be. And whether that will carry through into the next government or not is to be seen. But the MTA report that came out just before MAC about manufacturing's true contribution to the sector being nearer 20% than the sort of 8, 9, 10% that we're given credit for, actually got BBC coverage, you've got national newspaper coverage and things. So I think manufacturing is probably in a better place now in terms of public perception, but also government perception, and a long way that continue. But we're coming from quite a long way back.
Chris?
I think, given the first two sort of my fellow panellists, their views, I think I would slightly sit on the fence. I think if you looked at the last 10 years, take that timeline, I think for the first sort of 8 years of that or so, you'd be thinking, oh my God, yes, we have been unsupported. Does this country and, of course, our politicians recognise the importance of manufacturing? But actually, I'd start to agree a little bit with Henry. If you look at the last few years in isolation, particularly coming out of COVID-19, the role the sector's played, particularly in the pandemic around the development of the vaccine, the fact that over 99% of manufacturers remained operational. People like yourselves were going into businesses when most of the economy and the country had shut down. So I think people had started to begin to recognise, and we're starting to see a continuation of that now that wider geopolitics think about things like national resilience and thinking about defence and what can the UK manufacture here to protect us against some of those global economic trends affecting all Western countries. And if you look at that, now we're starting to recognise that the country has moved up the world rankings in terms of manufacturing. We've gone from being the 9th largest manufacturing country for a number of years, having just overtaken France, to be the 8th largest manufacturing nation based on the most recent statistics to hand. And the fact, I think there's a bit more of an understanding that actually we do employ around 2.6 million people at higher than average wages than the overall economy. So beginning to see a shift, still a long way to go. I would certainly agree with previous contributions. But what I would say to that is actually it's not also a dirty word anymore. I think people are starting to appreciate the sector. Politicians are starting to use manufacturing. Just last week, when we had some positive news for the UK economy around GDP results in Q1, both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor were in a manufacturing plant. I question whether we'd have seen that at the beginning of this 10-year spectrum we're looking at. So much more to be done, but it has improved. But I think significantly in the last few years, rather than the sort of 10-year timeline you ask about there, Gail.
Okay, thank you. Claire, anything to add?
I mean, it's what strikes me is obviously his range of views on the panel. I think we could always have a discussion about where we rank. I believe we're actually 11th, having dropped down again behind Mexico and France. But there you go. But I think starting with the real positives, we are still a major global manufacturing nation, right? I mean, we are 4th in Europe. R&D investment by businesses still accounts for most R&D investment in the UK, nearly 50% of exports. So always start with the positive. I think the thing, bringing it back to the report, that strikes me is that when you read the report, the challenges though that industry reported to be facing, those things still remain. So the things they were calling for in terms of longevity of policy, access to highly skilled workers, investment appetite, fiscal stability. All those things haven't really changed. We're still asking for the same things, right? So I think it's a testament to the strength of UK manufacturing that actually it's doing so well in those changing conditions. I think also, though, if we look at the things that have happened, colleagues referred to the pandemic. We've also had Brexit, so that's obviously had an impact on access to labour markets and flexible working. I do think some of the positives is that although we're here today talking about the technology adoption as well, and we still all want to be higher in the global ranking for robotics and automation, no one can argue with that. We are starting to see more experimentation, I think, more take-up of adoption of technology by businesses in the UK, be them small or large. Of course, we want more of that, but I think there has been some positives as well. Okay. Peter?
It's one of the joys of being the last one on the panel.
Yeah, I knew it was
most of my fund's been stolen.
Yeah, there's a hospital pass for you right there.
One of the things I'd probably just add is that I think one of the reasons for optimism potentially around manufacturing at the moment is there seems to be a realisation within government that it's one of the best routes to sustainable growth that we have. With the tax burden being so high at the moment, increasing tax revenue just by purely increasing tax isn't necessarily an option. So I think the government seeing that the same amount of tax on a bigger pot is a far better way of being able to deliver the things moving forward. So I'm fairly hopeful that given the necessity to continue to raise tax revenue, future governments are going to look and try and see that from sustainable growth, and manufacturing as being a route towards that.
Okay, thank you. Well, moving on, I'm going to, still in this report, I think we've covered a lot of it, but finally, this Making Good report said that the politicians felt that the manufacturing sector itself should better understand its own industrial culture and in turn accelerate the adoption of competitive business practices. I know, Mike, this is one of your things when, you know, the British engineer loves to keep a machine going and flog it to, and if it's still running, they're really thrilled with that. Whereas a German engineer is probably absolutely ecstatic with a new machine coming into their plant. So what do you think to that, Mike, in terms of the manufacturers themselves need to change some culture?
I think there's still some of that. I mean, we've heard from two businesses today, Walsall Wheelbarrow and Contracts Engineering, and they're very much changing that kind of culture. They are investing in the latest equipment. And to be fair, I'm not so sure it's the engineers, in all honesty. I don't think it's the manufacturing people. I think it's more the finance side of the businesses that really don't want to invest in the latest equipment. And we, culturally, we have that problem. Our capital investment in manufacturing is lower than most of our competitors. And that does impact things like investment in robotics. But we have to find a way of changing that. If we're going to be competitive going forward, we have to address that challenge. And I think some of that's a little bit beholden on us, because we've got to find ways of getting that message into the finance community through the banks, the accountants, and the finance directors and so on, so that they do understand why it's important that their businesses are investing in the latest equipment, and more of them understand that. There are quite a few businesses out there that do understand it and do invest, but unfortunately, there's far too many that don't.
Okay, thank you. Peter, I'm coming to you next as a treat.
Thank you. I would argue the validity of that comment within that report. I think it's still quite evident that there's still plenty of people in positions of authority that don't understand manufacturing more than the manufacturers themselves. And to Claire's point, providing an environment that makes it easier for manufacturing businesses to adopt automation or to adopt newer technologies is probably more important than shining light back on the manufacturers and saying that they need to do more themselves.
Okay, I'm going to move on then from that report and open up the discussion a bit further. And this was an interesting point, I think, Claire, that you raised earlier. What are the most important assets? How important is the role of the workforce in driving and delivering change to improve investment in technology and productivity? And Claire, I know this is an area you're keen on.
Yeah, I mean, if I think back, so obviously I didn't say at the start, but before I was with the Catapult, worked in manufacturing policy within government for a number of years, and I think the narrative is starting to shift about the importance of the workforce and skills. Going back even to sort of 2016-17 industrial strategy, Made Smarter review, we would look at obviously technology adoption, but very much about adopting new technology, kit, software, etc. And although I think we've always known that, you absolutely need skilled workers, I am really seeing a shift in the recognition that, you need to train your existing workforce as well as look to the future pipeline if we're actually going to be able to adopt and, really importantly, implement and use to their max, right, the technology. So, and you have to do things in tandem, right? You can't just say, okay, here's a lovely new bit of kit, be it a robot, be it AI, and not expect that the workforce to be trained up to be able to use it effectively. So I do think that, for things like the innovation cycle, I mean, workforce are going to come up with the ideas, they're going to develop the ideas further, they're actually going to implement and then ideally diffuse that technology and knowledge. So I think workforce is really central to technology adoption more than it has been before. I'm not saying it's easy, because we're all starting with that sort of understanding. It's how you actually do it is part of the discussion.
Especially as there's skill shortages across the board. So,
but going back to that point I made about, I suppose if we look at, what will make the shift, right, to technology adoption, we did see it in COVID, right? We saw companies adopting technology because they couldn't go into the factory. We used to get manufacturers saying that all the time, being remote imaging, monitoring the shop floor that way. I think there was a shift there. I do think that the difficulties in terms of recruiting, it is making manufacturers think, actually, I need to train up. I can't just keep recruiting.
Yeah. Chris?
Yeah, certainly. I think the skill, if you take this in two elements, the firstly with skills is absolutely agree that the skills agenda and the lack of skills, both in terms of existing and access in the labour market, is really driving this. I think the biggest sort of message I'm getting from businesses talking to all the time is about more with less. It's really interesting, but despite the wider conditions of kind of volatile marketplaces, uncertainty, and lots of issues around turning inquiries into orders more generally in the sector, investment levels haven't really dipped off quite as much as the kind of uncertainty and lack of confidence would necessarily suggest. And it is because of that doing more with less mentality that we've had to adopt. And I know we've always been focused on that in manufacturing, but particularly because of the skills element and adoption of automation and technology more broadly is perhaps the benefactor of that. But I think we're starting to see, if I talk about the skills element, we're starting to see lots and lots of organisations think much more around digital literacy. Just before the session started, something we were talking about around how we do actually have an average age of around 52 for the manufacturing workforce in the UK. So actually, have we got the people naturally gifted to be really sort of immobile in terms of adoption of new technology, or are they the first adopters on AI? Possibly not. I'll sort of leave that to your own assumptions. So we're starting to see businesses think about short courses as well around that digital literacy, so that actually it's around being able to take those more transferable skills to different pieces of kit, different systems, so on and so forth. But also perhaps taking into account the sort of focus of the session around culture. I spent Friday walking around Toyota's site. We hosted an event around lean and lean improvement. And it actually struck me at how some of these things aren't necessarily new. We're talking about lean, which obviously kind of long-standing principles adopted in the sector, but actually the power of people behind that. And I think that's absolutely the same here in terms of technology. If you think about, if we take Toyota as an example, the fact that everyone on the shop floor is a team member, and it's about empowering those people. And I really think the sweet spot, both in those large sort of more corporate environments, but also in an SME environment, the sweet spot I see, particularly in the SME community, is when you've got teams that are saying, give us the next bit of kit, we've adopted a robot, what's further down the track? And if you're working with people like the MTC, you've probably got a roadmap in place and a bit of a vision of what technology might look like in your organisation. And if you've got people really on the shop floor and in middle management pushing you, whether it's been knocking on the finance director's door or otherwise, that really is a really luxury spot to be. People wanting to be there, adopting that. And I always think the best organisations that are perhaps on the forefront of some of these things is being a digital or industrial magpie, coming to events like this, going to other factories, seeing what other people are doing. And that's absolutely the best way, trying to find, have you got the skills and the people? But I think that culture element, not just in terms of the technical and vocational skills of things, really is important and can really make significant differences too.
Thank you. Henry?
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything the panel has said. We're going through a period of almost unheralded transformation in the sector, driven by technology. And of course, if you don't bring your people with you, or any single change program, every single change program will fail. So the culture is absolutely critical to the success of all of these projects. Culture is an interesting one because you guys in the room will represent myriad of different businesses in terms of size, scope, product development, whatever, etc. So it's quite difficult to sort of focus in on one specific aspect because it's not going to be relevant for everybody. But culture is absolutely the heart of these change programs. Without the buy-in from the shop floor, they will fail. Simple as that.
Peter?
I think when it comes to culture and the workforce, I think culture in the way that we educate our workforce is something that needs to change. There's some, the opportunity to reskill people and to redeploy them in roles that are more relevant moving forward does require a cultural mindset shift. And I think within the way in which we utilise things like the apprenticeship levy, making that more relevant and available for a wider range of training to support the skills that we need moving forward would be great. I think an understanding that the culture within our education establishments needs to change to provide correct career paths for the correct people. I think, and that might be a topic we get onto later, but the way in which schools are targeted to put people through university rather than put people into relevant career paths is a big challenge. And there's a huge amount of people that would be very, very well utilised in the manufacturing world if the culture was to change within schools to push people more towards the availability of apprenticeships and different types of training rather than success looks like getting as many people as we can through university.
Sure, thank you. I'm going to move on now, and for anyone who's just sort of nodding off a bit, we're now going to talk about, we're going to ask the question, does size matter? So keep tuned. Is predominance of SMEs, that's what we're talking about in this landscape, is that holding back progress? Because the big corporates have probably got all their automation in, or they're very in tune, they're spending the money. What about SMEs? What's the challenge for them, do you think, Henry?
Well, I think SMEs are naturally more innovative kind of cultures because people can express themselves. They're not in such a rigid environment. I mean, clearly they don't have the resource in terms of the finance potentially and sometimes in some cases the expertise to implement new technology. But certainly in terms of the cultural ability to change and adapt and modify quickly, I think SMEs are very well placed to lead it. And you look at a lot of the great sort of inventions of the last 20, 30 years, they have all started in the SME community and then scale.
Mike?
No, I think that's a very good point from Henry, and I think that's really where we need to find ways of supporting the SME community, because I think in a lot of cases they want to, but they struggle in terms of resources, be it money or probably more importantly time, because they're all very busy doing what it is they do. And they need some assistance to find the time to make the right investment decisions and to help reduce the risk, because that's obviously also very significant to them. So we need to find ways of providing that kind of support.
Okay, so Claire, do you think people have to be brave, SME, they have to be brave to go ahead, because obviously the risk, they haven't got a department looking into it, or they perhaps don't know where to get the advice from?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can't argue. There's lots of research out there, right, that talks about, this horrible phrase of the underperforming tail. It's just, none of us like that, right? But, we are over 99% makeup of SMEs in manufacturing are, over 99% of SMEs, I should have said that. But I think, there's also lots of information out there that says that, SMEs and other businesses don't like seeking advice. And, if they do seek advice, it's generally as a result of a recommendation from another business. I mean, it's not. So, over the years, of course, we had Manufacturing Advisory Service that closed. There was a high level of peer-to-peer recommendation through to MAS. It's not because here's MAS, jolly good idea. It's actually a lot of it was through recommendations. And if you look at some of the research coming through the Made Smarter Adoption Programme, which is for SME businesses, most of those engagements with the SMEs that go on to do actual projects are as a result of referrals from or recommendations from other SMEs. So I think there is that culture about being risk. I suppose, and you think about a lot of the advice on the market, it's not cheap, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's there are lots of reasons why not. I think the thing to sort of say, and you would probably come on to this, but there is support out there, right? But I think it's how we break that cycle of people not seeking the support. I think that's really important.
Sure, because paradoxically, Germany is made up a lot of SMEs,
but they're bigger. I think that's the thing. We've got
a lot of family SMEs though, but they're bigger now. But they started small. Yeah. Chris, what do you think about the SME situation?
I think it's an interesting question, because I think I agree by design, there's no way that SMEs are any less innovative or nimble than a larger organisation. But I think it's really important to acknowledge how in an SME environment, like many of you will be, you are wearing a hat and be more things to less people. And I think obviously over the last several years now, the number of different things kind of coming down on the news agenda or generally in the UK economy has been a big barrier where you're having to sort of firefight all the time. So it's around having bandwidth. That's been probably the biggest problem with this. But it does take leadership as well. I think that is really, really, really important. But I would certainly highlight what colleagues have said around support that is available, particularly through things like Made Smarter, which we've seen having really strong impact on supporting SMEs adopt digital technology. Both, particularly, I get to see that more firsthand in the West Midlands and the East Midlands, but also something that's been running now a little while in the northern parts of England too. And actually the fact that there's ability to really digest where to go, independent advice, bringing together assets potentially through the programme, like MTC in some instances, but also providing ability for that funding element. So I think there's lots of little barriers. And I don't think each one on their own is probably is too much, but actually when you factor in time, cost, and so on, and skills, and there's more, that's where it becomes a problem. It's more those things that are adding up, and that's why things like Made Smarter, and great to see that now being rolled out in other parts of the country, so that success of supporting SMEs will be felt in other parts of England and also in the devolved nations moving forwards over the next 18 months or so.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned leadership there. So Peter, I'll come to you first. Do we think that we have the leadership and drive to support this culture change in UK businesses?
Within the businesses, I think the culture is starting to evolve out of necessity. I think if you look at SMEs, I think will be leaders within small businesses that are concerned about whether adopting certain technologies for them due to certain perceived barriers like cost and complexity and all those sorts of things historically. But what will end up changing that is, the lack of, one of the things that we hear most from our members is trying to recruit is almost impossible. So having a lack of available labour will force people down the route of looking at other alternatives in order to keep their production or keep their businesses moving forward. And I think as long as those leaders of those smaller businesses then go and seek the help that we've been talking about earlier, to go out and find the ways in which they can make the technology adoption less scary for them. Yeah. If they're brave enough to go and do that, and they change their culture to do that, then I think we'll be okay.
Okay, because baby steps, just doing a small piece that you don't have to go lights out, do you? That's the whole premise, that they can change at a pace that suits them. So let's go on to diversity and inclusion. Let's go on to that topic. Do you think diversity and inclusion in the workplace will result in greater innovation and a healthier bottom line, as well as and this is all a bit of a change in culture as well? I'll come to you, Claire.
As the woman on the panel.
As we are diverse on this panel.
Absolutely. My brain is absolutely led by sort of evidence and numbers, and there are so many reports out there, right? Be it McKinsey, be it Boston Consulting Group, be it Forbes. If you look everywhere, there's so much research that says greater diversity leads to greater innovation. There are lots of numbers. It was like 25% greater revenues for companies that have more women and more ethnic minorities in the workforce. You can't argue with it. I also think, we were talking about sort of changes since earlier reports, be it the 2013 one or previous. Forever we've been trying to get more women and girls in manufacturing, right? The numbers are still pretty shocking, right? We do make up 48% of the workforce, and yet manufacturing averages around 24%. And so even though we're getting more young women into STEM education, that is not transferring into manufacturing and engineering jobs. And we've got so many vacancies, right? We need to do better than that. The shift I've also sort of seen is in, discussions around neurodiversity. I was in some meetings this morning, and, I think that is a huge untapped area as well. And I think, maybe I'm going off a bit of a tangent here, but I do sort of think we need to look again at the language. I often talk about, STEM. So we absolutely want more people in STEM, right? But we also need to be aware that just using the term STEM can also put off an awful swathe of people, right? If I was thinking my own career path, I wasn't sort of STEM focused as a kid. I would have been, if anyone told me that the only way into manufacturing and engineering was through STEM, I would be straight away, it's not for me, right? So I just think we need to revisit how we promote manufacturing and engineering. There's lots of reasons, right? And it's no one silver bullet. I think flexibility of workforce as well. Flexibility is going to be a huge issue for attracting anybody. If you think about young people coming through now, it's not just about pay, although we can get into that as another subject. I think the flexibility of conditions, clear career paths and personal development, and also that recognition about different ways that make people tick, looking after your workforce. Those are the things that are going to eventually overcome diversity, I think.
Okay, thank you. Henry, anything to add?
Yeah, and there's no doubt that there's a skills shortage facing the sector, and that there's a huge swathe of the population don't really consider manufacturing as a viable career path. I would urge you all to get behind things like the Make UK National Manufacturing Day. So rather than small localized initiatives trying to get schools in and show them around or whatever, club together behind Make UK's initiative and let's get it into the national press. Let's get Rishi or whoever the Prime Minister is at the time to actually front it. So, I think the sort of very worthy efforts to address the skills challenge at the moment are too fragmented, too localized. Everyone's trying to do the right thing, but we need to swing behind a major organisation like these guys who've got that clout, both politically and with the press, to try and unify it. And I know in America that, you'll probably be able to tell me better than that, Chris, but the huge amount of children engaged with their National Manufacturing Day, because it was a blatant copy of their programme, was it not?
Yeah, so I think for those of you that are less familiar with National Manufacturing Day, and really welcome the sort of plug, Henry. So having very much stolen what the Make UK equivalent in the US does at the National Association for Manufacturers, where in the autumn of every year for a number of years now, they've invited in local communities behind the four walls of within factories to showcase what they do, what they make, and importantly, the careers available. And that's something we've successfully done for the last 2 years here, sort of led by Make UK, but welcoming any manufacturer or closely associated industries to be part of that journey. Looking forward to doing that again on the 26th of September later this year. And that's all about kind of friends and family, even better local schools, local colleges coming behind, and sometimes even job seekers as well. And we've been working very closely with government departments on this as well, in terms of Department for Education, in terms of telling schools out there around the country that this is taking place, to sort of join up with local industrial partners, but also the Department for Work and Pensions around job seekers to really sort of showcase what manufacturing could look like, given that actually thinking about lots of people coming back into the workforce, perhaps at an older age. So it's about inspiring younger people into manufacturing, but also thinking about those people that are coming back from inactivity, re-entering the workforce and so on, retraining, particularly as you think of new industries that manufacturing are leading the way on, in terms of places like the adoption of technology or indeed the transition to net zero. So really, really important. And I think that inspiration piece is so important. Talking about the diversity and equality point, is you really cannot be what you cannot see. And I think the more that we can shine a light and celebrate people within your organisations that perhaps are from a more minority stakeholder from within manufacturing, then even better. And something I think we've always been particularly bad on, because we're health and safety environments, we don't easily allow people to come and see what we do. And that has been a problem that actually over a number of years, I think we've accidentally sort of fallen into this stereotype that we now have that is really, really out of date. So really implore you to think about how you celebrate what you do and the success in your organisations. But as Henry says, think about campaigns around equality, around National Manufacturing Day and so forth, to really push forward on that agenda.
Thank you. I know, Peter, that's something Automate UK work on.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's it's great that associations and larger institutions are doing what they can do to signpost the right things to encourage people into careers in manufacturing. But going back to that report earlier, when I was saying that it was unfair for the government to criticise manufacturers, I think the one area where businesses should be a bit more reflective and say, well, actually, maybe we could be better, is around that thing about engaging with people and trying to encourage them into a career within their business. Having been a governor at a school, I can say the amount of engagement you get from local business at that school is almost zero. And I think businesses should be a lot better at engaging within their local community and within the local schools to try and identify the fact that there is a career opportunity with them and that there is a route out of school into a manufacturing job, using people within your business that maybe went to that school as a good advocate for how you can progress within the career. I think is a really good way of doing things.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so looking at younger people, can technology inspire a new generation and influence existing worker career choices? I'm thinking of the Xbox generation. They're not going to be wanting to shifting boxes at the end of a line. They're going to be wanting to program a robot, aren't they? Or they're in that way. Who am I going to go to? Chris, I'm going to. You've got away with it being in the middle there. I'll just...
Less time to think.
so inspiration.
Absolutely, because I think it's interesting. The last 2 times I've been in this building, the 2 things that have really captured people's attention was today, with some of the kit just outside. That's what everyone's doing, sort of videoing, even sort of younger apprentices I noticed here a little bit earlier on in the day, particularly using the virtual reality headsets. That's the stuff that gets people interested. And last time I was here, there was an excellent speaker using a jetpack who was out there. And again, the biggest thing anyone was ever interested in. And I think when you compare that with other sectors, I really don't understand how they compete. But I think we've all acknowledged that we have struggled to do so over a little while. So I think we can. I think it does come back to that storytelling piece around how we're offering the solutions to lots of problems, whether it be not just in technology, but also thinking around it from a net zero perspective, which, to be fair, also often goes hand in hand with technology around reducing our emissions and being more efficient. By thinking, actually, look, around people want mission-led sort of organisations to work for. They want to know what their credentials are across a lot of these things. And actually, if you actually go on manufacturers' websites, they're often not demonstrating what they're doing in these areas. And yet, actually, when you get the opportunity to speak to organisations, they're already doing loads of things. It's back to that storytelling. And I think, of course, it's not all going to be jetpacks and virtual reality, but we need to do better at telling that story, whether it be through tech, net zero. Those are the things that particularly the next generation are more and more interested in. So absolutely is the answer to that.
Okay, Mike, I haven't come to you for a while.
I think some of it is about use of technology. The current generations are brought up with technology. They've got mobile phones, Xboxes, computers. That is all completely normal to them. When I was much younger, we didn't have any of that. And you cannot, as a manufacturer, expect to attract the younger generation if you've got 1980s, 1990s production equipment, because to them that just looks old-fashioned. They're just not interested. You've got to be using appropriate technology to interest them in working in these factories. And I think that's also an important point in terms of the diversity issue as well, because it also makes it more attractive for women, for example, because it's a more equal environment. And therefore, I think we need to make sure that our businesses, firstly, using the right technology, but then promoting the fact that they're using technologies, as Chris has just mentioned, get the stories out there so that people are interested in coming to work in these factories. They don't have the perception that they're old and antique equipment, dark, dirty places to work, because there's still an awful lot of perceptions out there that that's what manufacturing's like. And we have to find a way of telling that story better so that people understand that it is an attractive place to work, it does use technology, it is interesting, and it is exciting.
Sure. Well, maybe Greg Wallace in Me and My Factory has done quite a lot of good there, a bit like Clarkson for farming.
Can I just jump in?
Yes, so absolutely.
I think this the inspiration thing is very important. I'm sure most of you remember Richard Noble and the Bloodhound Project. So I've become very good friends with Richard, and I've introduced him to the MTC recently, and they're going to be doing some work here on his next project, which is called Thrust, which is about breaking the world water speed record. And there's going to be lots of announcements going forward quite quickly. But when Richard was doing Bloodhound, I think there was something like 33 million people under the age of 18 interacted with his website, because, they don't associate that sort of world land speed record with manufacturing. But of course, that is what it is. So it is creating that story, and we're going to be working with Richard, and I think the MTC are as well, about asking manufacturers what they would like from schools in terms of the education requirements that you guys need. Just one other quick point. We run Smart Manufacturing Engineering Week, and on the second afternoon we have our STEM afternoon. And we've told our exhibitors, bugger off Mike, bugger off Henry, can you send your apprentices, please, to interact with these kids? They don't want to be talking to Mike, they don't want to be talking to me, or Oliver over here. They want to be talking to the young people who they can relate to. Because again, it's all about that perception side of life as well. It's not old, stuffy men or whatever it is. It's young, exciting people. Sorry, that's my sort of interjection.
Yeah, no, love it. Yeah. Peter?
I think when we talk about inspiration, there's still a big piece to do in making sure that our educators understand who they're educating. I still don't believe that it's something that's seen as aspirational within schools to go into career in manufacturing and engineering. And I think there are very few teachers within schools that would necessarily be providing that level of ambition unless they have some sort of personal, enjoyment in it. I think I was at a Make UK event maybe a year, 18 months ago, where someone stood up and said that their child had been told at school to stop messing around, otherwise they'd end up working in the factory. And if you've got teachers telling kids that, it's reinforcing that real negative approach to what a career in manufacturing could be. And so if we can educate our educators to explain working with technology and how careers can be very different, I think that would be a huge benefit.
So how can industry do that? How can you influence schools, teachers, curriculum? Claire, there's an easy one for you.
I think, it's really tough, right? I mean, if you think about some of I haven't looked at the latest stats for things like T-levels, but it was really quite difficult to get employers actually engaged with T-levels, right? And I think, again, going back to the SME makeup in the UK, it's time out for businesses, isn't it? It's really difficult for business. I don't underestimate that, the time commitment that you would need to give to actually put work into, to turn those perceptions around. And I also think it's difficult because it's it's a lot of a postcode lottery, right? If you think about where I live in Hampshire, near Farnborough, we've got the aerospace cluster, we've got the likes of Kinetic, they're going into schools. But I think the evidence is still not quite there, the extent to which even those really positive interactions will influence kids' career choices. I think it's probably a combination of things, as in teachers are saying the right thing, parents are saying the right thing, it's more visible, be it in press or everywhere. But, I think just even knowing who your employers are locally and what's the affinity with them. I mean, talking to Nissan earlier today, a lot of people think, and recognise the importance of Nissan in the Northeast. And then, young parents, teachers cannot argue with the fact it's a good career choice, right, for young people to go forward. But that's not everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a mixed picture. But, no, absolutely no easy answers. I mean, I should actually do a real plug, obviously, for my own organisation. I think, organisations like Catapults and other technology institutions, I think we also play a big role. And it is very different, right? Manufacturing is a very mixed bag. And it really struck me going around the apprenticeship centre today. Wow, you're blown away. You go to an FE college, not all FE colleges, but a lot, you're not going to get blown away by a lot of them, right? So I think it's also recognising that there's going to be different experiences there.
Okay, Henry, I'm going to ask you, what role can the media play in this change of culture from all this?
Well, sadly, from our perspective, not a great deal in terms of the public perception, because we preach the converted. But we run programs like our Top 100 program, which is not necessarily recognising the ultimate leaders of JLR, Rolls-Royce as the unsung hero. There's the young hero, etc. It's just trying to create, people who have achieved something and give them that due recognition. But I mean, the media is a huge part to play in the perception of manufacturing. The dark satanic mills, and they still typically talk about really dull production lines, etc., etc. But as I said right at the start, I think that's beginning to change. We've been banging our drum like everyone organisation represented on this panel, but we are talking to the converted. It's that wider public perception. It's that schools issue that we were referring to. So it's a tricky one and it's a slow one, but I think we're beginning to make a difference. Okay, so coming to you, Chris. So we're talking about businesses themselves have an obligation to be part of this culture change outside of their businesses.
Yeah, I think so. And it's a challenge. And as I said, I think Claire makes a good point. None of us would underestimate the challenge in finding the time. I mentioned bandwidth earlier about engaging with the provider, putting pressure on them. But also I think engaging with providers, engaging with your employees, friends and families, all those things are really, really important. And I think not just because we should be doing that and celebrating our success and patting ourselves on the back, there is some real return on investment for doing those things, whether it be influencing the curriculum with local providers. Whether that we had, for instance, take National Manufacturing Day, we had a business in Burton that had 50 school kids round in the next college kids round in the next apprenticeship intake. They took 10 of those 50 kids that went round on the next intake. So it does have a real ROI, and that's of course what we're always really looking for with lots of these things. And those engagements with providers, friends and family, even getting the media to come and see you. I was sat with somebody who presents the news in the Midlands a few weeks ago at an awards dinner, and they said exactly the sorts of things Henry was saying about how there is beginning to be a bit of a shift, and actually producers are saying we don't want bad news, we want to see what locally we can find with good news. And so the appetite is a little bit there. There's still a long way to go, but I think the role of kind of the media, other stakeholders is really important. We talked about how government and policy can help us a bit more, but I think as ever with these things, it's always about the private and public partnership, trying to meet somewhere in the middle. So there is a big role for businesses playing their part too. And I think, as I said earlier, sharing our success, celebrating our stories, even if that's simply award programs, entering the top 100, National Manufacturing Day. There's a lot of opportunity and a lot of tools in the toolbox to do some of those things.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm just going to have a quick break. Is there any questions from the audience that you would like to ask one of these esteemed people before I crack on? Oh, yes.
Afternoon. Firstly, panel, thank you. That was a fantastic set of views on a fantastic range of questions. You mentioned an example from America that we'd quite rightly copied in terms of National Manufacturing Day. Are there any other examples out there from other territories that you think we can perhaps copy to move things faster, whether it's government, local government doing it, whether it's manufacturers, technology developers? What are some of the examples of excellence from overseas that we could perhaps borrow?
I think we're sitting in one.
Go on, Henry.
That was my feed to you, Mike.
Well, I mean, yeah, the MTC is here to try and inspire UK manufacturing. That's part of our role, as it were, and with our partners in the rest of the high value manufacturing catapult. So yes, we develop the technology. Yes, we show what the technology can do. But most importantly, we also have an apprentice program, and we do an awful lot on skills as well. So part of our activity is really trying to figure out how to inspire UK manufacturers to be truly successful. I wouldn't say we're there yet, but there's a long way to go. But I think we are having a positive impact.
I think the original idea behind the catapults was fundamentally copied or from the German model.
Yes.
Yeah, that was my point.
Yeah, it was copied from
Fraunhofer model.
Yeah.
I think coming in, for first things first, my day job is looking after and working with manufacturing businesses in the Midlands and East. So if I ever get to go overseas, I'll probably get a nosebleed. So the biggest thing I think is the thing that you'll probably hear most from Make UK, but also lots of industrial partners as well, is if the biggest thing I could think about what other countries have that we don't have, surprise from colleagues, is the lack of a UK industrial strategy. Most Western countries have an industrial strategy that really provides a bit more of a North Star. We talked about the number of challenges, particularly in SME environment they're dealing with, that change and policies chop and change. We really need to think about having a more stable sort of political environment to provide a little bit more certainty for businesses. And I think something that we really lack compared to our international competitors is that industrial strategy that can provide that longer term consistency and confidence to invest. So that's what really sprung to mind with your question.
Totally agree.
Thank you. Anyone else got anything? Oh, yes. Oh, many. Excellent.
Very nice, the lady over there. She put her hand up.
There's one behind you, Oliver, I think.
Hi, Jill Burnett from Wave Drives. We're a research-intensive SME, just exploring moving into production for our new device. The thing that we found is that it's a nightmare navigating the very, very fragmented support landscape. I don't know what your views on that are. I mean, 20k for a grant to support production. how realistic is that, for example?
Peter, can I come to you on that?
I think it's a common story that we hear from SMEs that access to this support is exactly that, very, very fragmented and very, very difficult to find. Weirdly, larger organisations who probably have more of the tools and skills to be able to do it find it easier to access these grants because they're quite complex to create the applications, etc. So,
no problem writing applications, but I have done maybe 27 different sources in the last couple of years, from the Patent Office to Innovate Edge to Innovate UK to, it's just very fragmented. And as an SME, there's a lot of money going into the support organisations, and it's really hard to find the benefits that you need. And that continuity of support, because it's easy if you've got a simple query, but if you're trying to do a commercialisation of a piece of technology, nobody's with you until you've actually done it, perhaps.
Claire?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with that statement about it's fragmented and it's difficult to navigate. I think absolutely that's the case. If I think about what I mean, and even like going back to the other question, and I'm not sure there's any, because I think other countries are also having challenges, right? You know, so it's not like we can cherry pick different bits, but I think lots of countries are having problems. I think where I sort of see good examples is where there is a real end-to-end site of exactly to address that, really. I guess some, an approach, a policy approach, which you would have from early stage research through development to scale up and commercialization, and then the support for SMEs. And what I'm doing is I'm painting what the ideal model is that we don't have, right? So I think if going forward, I think my ask, even beyond an industrial strategy, I'm sort of think that, that's obviously a good idea, is more that sort of systems thinking for policymakers to address just that sort of problem, where you're making it as easy as possible to find the support available, but actually you can really describe it within that sort of manufacturing production value chain for where you can get the support. I mean, there's never going to be enough support, right? I mean, having been in a policy department, how much can you actually get? But it's I think that's what we need to get better at. So it's a clearly identified solution for the problem you've got, and that is not easy at the moment.
It's not a help for you, is it?
I'm interested in the amount of money that goes into buildings and new buildings and equipment and support organisations versus the amount of money that actually goes into creating progress in the SME, in the manufacturing SME. You know, at the coalface where we are putting in 24 hours a day.
And you haven't been successful in getting any money in, or?
I have, yes.
Oh, you have? Okay.
But
I mean, I can't disagree with anything you said. I mean, I talked to a lot of SMEs, and they're having the same thing, and there is no obvious pathway at the moment. Just a quick question: are you trying the KTNs?
Yes.
You are. I mean, that would be my probably advice to go to start with, but you're already there. I thought you would.
I think that the Catapult network is regarded as being very successful, but I think it's very successful at the corporate level. There seems to be lots of engagement. I really question how many SMEs can engage with it. It may be very different in this manufacturing sphere.
Yeah, I mean, over 50% of the businesses that engage with high value manufacturing catapult centres are SMEs. But I think, as ever, the devil's in the detail, isn't it? It depends on the type of support that you're looking for. I mean, I think I would absolutely signpost people to the UKRI's website, which have a sort of grant finder. So actually, if it's not on there, chances are it doesn't exist, which is another issue, right? But I think, that's, yeah. So it's further to go. I mean, yeah. There are some clear gaps, But I think there is some good stuff out there as well.
I think what you're hearing from Ferro Palace is that we absolutely sympathise with you. And actually, the fact that you've been successful in a number of those applications and not finding grant applications difficult means you're actually winning in this space. And I think we massively sympathise with you, and something that is absolutely something that we talk about when representing businesses to government. And to reiterate, we're an employers organisation that's non-profit, not attached to government, and put forward that view very regularly around how can we join these things up. That's often sounds so simple, and it should be so simple, but it, as you identified, it really isn't.
It's difficult.
Okay, thank you. Yes, lady over there.
Hiya, just thinking about how we can, what we can learn from other sectors as well as other countries about getting more young people interested in joining manufacturing as a career path. I think as well that also sort of runs into the sort of diversity and inclusion piece as well. Apprenticeships have actually, it really is changing. So I was at a sixth form, next step pathways meeting for my son a week ago, and I would say 75% of the event was about apprenticeships. And my daughter, who's 3 years older, at her sixth form event, it was completely not the case. She's currently doing an apprenticeship, and she had to really find it all out on her own. And the change in 2 years from the meeting for my son last week was huge. And there's a real shift in young people's mentality. Yeah. They are really engaged with apprenticeships at the moment. Some sectors are really going with that. So, accounting, law, finance, banking, all those kind of sectors. And the young people are super engaged about wanting to get into it, particularly people from young, lower income families, because the amount of money it costs to go to university is astronomical. Obviously, in an apprenticeship, you've got no debt, you are getting paid. 99% of the time, you've got a job at the end of it. And it is not seen as an also-ran, it is seen very much as the brightest and the most motivated. So I would argue that actually apprenticeships are really having a moment, and maybe manufacturing could learn from the likes of the finance, accounting, law firms, big names that are absolutely pushing this. And it might be a way to get, more young people involved, and also more young people from perhaps, sort of maybe more urban areas, or from a different sort of social class, to help with the whole diversity thing. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, really.
I've got one thought on that, potentially. The apprenticeship levy and the way it's structured is very much on the types of apprenticeships that qualify for the levy. So potentially, if you're a big finance firm or a big accounting firm, it's a damn sight easier, because it fits much more in what has historically been a focus for the government to continue to build on that sector. So changing the levy in such a way that it makes it far more inclusive for far more types of training and apprenticeships that fit within the manufacturing sector would make life a lot easier for manufacturers to actually tap into that and recruit from that industry, from that sector of society.
I think there was this chap here had something a question, and that's going to be our final question, I think. This chap here. Do you have your hand up?
Yes.
Oh, you didn't.
So ask one anyway.
Think of a question. Come on.
Yeah, some great points from the panel. I just want to draw it back to this whole issue of skills, and I think one of the sort of questions I've got is coming in from a big industrialist at Rolls-Royce. We don't really have too much problems with acquiring skills. Biggest jetpack maker in the world, probably. So we don't have an issue there. But what I'm seeing more and more, we're sort of looking at the skills of the newcomers coming through from the apprenticeship academies. But I just question whether we should be looking there. We should be looking at more of the middle-aged white men like ourselves, because that's where the skill gap, I think, lies. It's this lack of understanding that we have with the pace of technology development coming through. And what we're seeing is maybe points like Mike made right at the beginning about finance. Sometimes I think we fail to make decisions through finance because we just don't understand the skills that are required of ourselves in trying to understand to make these decisions. So I'm just trying to turn it around a bit and just get your thoughts on not the skills of the newcomers coming through. I've got a 17-year-old who's just passionate about coding. I can't make any sense of what he's talking about, but I'm just really keen to understand, how do we turn this around and get the skills at the top level of very hierarchical organisations sorted?
Mike?
No, I think it's a very important point. I think somebody mentioned earlier that the average age in manufacturing was 52, I think it was.
Yeah.
And one of the things we really need to recognise is that the workforce that we're going to have in manufacturing for the next kind of 10 years, most of it is already in there already. And we've got to find ways of upskilling the existing workforce, including the management. You know, it's across the board, so that they can utilise the latest technologies. They don't necessarily need to understand all the detail. They don't necessarily need to operate it, but they need to understand enough to be able to make sure that they invest in it and they utilise it. And it's a very valid point, particularly with SMEs. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges. You know, Rolls-Royce can afford to send people away for extended periods of time to do training, but SMEs can't. They cannot release people for long periods of time. So we've got to find ways of putting short courses together, day release, online, whatever it might be, but something that can deliver that skills adoption piece to the SME community. And I don't think we're there yet, but we need to find a way of doing it. And I think it's a very valid point, Ian.
Thank you. Peter?
I might start to sound like a bit of a stuck record here, but Mike made a good point there about cost and affording it. Smaller businesses need to be able to justify or afford the training that's required to upskill their existing staff. At the moment, the funding that's available for government for this sort of training is not as readily available as it could be, yet there are millions and millions of pounds of apprenticeship levy money being handed back. So using the levy as a more wider training and skills levy as opposed to an apprenticeship levy would potentially unlock access to finance to support that kind of training activity for those of us who, you know, would need to take that on later on in our careers.
And I think just trying to wrap up the last three questions a little bit, I think one really interesting around the other sectors, and I think we are having a bit of a moment around apprenticeships more broadly, and I think that's being felt in manufacturing, not least Make UK. We have a training centre in Birmingham. I know the guys here, actually the capacity problems are a problem because the interest is there, both from employers and getting young people into those roles. And you're right around identifying, well, actually, what if we've had this gap of people over a number of years where apprenticeship starts haven't been where we want to be, the retraining element as well. So we've got it's not just around the lower end of the demographics. But I think given what happened a few weeks ago around the local elections and the mayoralities in terms of devolution, is really interesting without being too technical around funding, is completely agree with Peter's points around the apprentice levy. But what's interesting, if you are a business operating under one of the combined authorities, so take the newly formed East Midlands Combined Authority for Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, they will have additional funds and powers over skills funding. And if you take an example of that here in the West Midlands, where for local funding or local decisions made with funding powers, that has been spent on the adult education budget, which has been around reskilling, retraining. Some of the boot camps that colleagues at MTC have been delivering were funded partially by some of those devolved powers. So sometimes actually having the what we're seeing in devolution is also actually beginning to help solve some of our problems as well. So interesting, if you are in one of those areas, we'll see more of that happen moving forwards.
Thank you very much. Well, all it remains for me to say is thank you very much for coming along to listening. Thank you to the panel for being brilliant. If you want to replay this or see any of the other events we've run, go to ukautomationforum.com and you'll find out more information about us there. Thank you.